All right, hello everyone. My name is Reagan Pufall, and I will be teaching this webinar today from our lovely Makerspace 3D lab here over in DoSpace. So today what we're going to be looking at is getting started in Illustrator on the two laser cutters that are available at DoSpace. And so as part of my job, normally I teach how to use laser cutters over at Iowa Western. And then I also teach, mentor and teach on the laser cutter and other stuff in the 3D lab here. So if in the future, once we can start doing in-person stuff again, please feel free to schedule a mentor meeting with me, and I can walk you through some of the stuff that we can only really do in person. But there's plenty on the software side that we can look at today to understand how to get ready to use these machines and how you can best format them for it. So let's take a quick look at some stuff that we need to know before moving into the stuff in Illustrator. All right, so there's two laser cutters available at DoSpace. So the older one that they have is called the Universal VLS Laser. So when you're prepping for this machine, it can do things different than the Glowforge. So it's not as powerful, but it can handle 12 by 16 by 4-inch material. So you can actually handle something that's quite a bit deeper than the Glowforge, which can only handle 1/2 inch or 2 inch, depending on how you have it set up. It can also take cylindrical objects where you can load this special device inside it that will rotate glasses and other things like that for you and allow you to engrave on it, which is pretty cool. And this one's really good for more advanced users. And when we get to the printing interface, that'll make a little bit more sense what I mean by that. So like once you're pretty comfortable with setting stuff up for a laser cutter, this one can be a really good option, but it's a little bit less forgiving on how you set up your files. The other one that they just got, so it's brand new, like they sent out the email a couple of weeks ago, which is a Glowforge Pro. The best way to think about a Glowforge Pro is that this is like the Apple version of a laser cutter, except unlike Apple, it's surprisingly affordable as laser cutters go. Still really expensive, but not compared to other laser cutters. So this one can take material that's 11 by 19.5 and up to 2 inches in size. Now, normally it can only take 2 inches, 1/2 inch in size, but if you take out the crumb tray, you can fit in stuff that's 2 inches thick. So keep that in mind when using this one, is that it can't take stuff as thick. And then max part size tells you the maximum size of something you can put inside there. It's also quite a bit more powerful at 45 watts. So while the cutter will cut quite a bit more quickly than the ULS, the software kind of makes it come out as a wash depending on what exactly you're doing. And it also can't do cylindrical objects. Like I mentioned before, the user interface for this is way friendlier and it's way more forgiving in terms of what happens when you don't prep a file very well. So speaking of file prep, we're going to be using two words a lot today, which is raster and vector. So over here on the left, we have a vector version of this J. Jonah Jameson drawing. I mean, not vector, raster version of this J. Jonah Jameson drawing. And over here on the right, we have the vector version of it. So a raster is an image that is made up of a set number of pixels. So the vast majority of graphics that you're used to seeing on a computer or on the web are going to be raster graphics. They're made up of a set number of pixels. The other type of files that you can occasionally see and are very laser cutter friendly are called vector files. And these are basically paths and points that you can apply color and strokes to create an image. And each one of these work in laser cutter, but they do very different things. And that's, just keep them in mind when I'm talking about raster, that these are images made up of pixels, and vector are images made up of vector lines that Illustrator is really good for making. Something else we want to keep in mind is we're going to be talking about color. So we'll be talking about RGB color space and CMY color space. So RGB color space is basically the digital color space. The screen that you're watching this on right now is showing you red, green, and blue pixels in order to create the full range of tones. The web camera is capturing everything in RGB. Your eyeballs, unless you're a lucky girl and you've got that fourth color receptor, actually also work the same way. They capture and understand red, green, blue light. While CMYK, on the other hand, is going to be a mass market print. So like this is what like a color newspaper would be printed in, or like a color brochure that they produce lots of. So Illustrator is a program that's set up for doing lots of stuff in CMYK. So it will often default to CMYK, and you want to make sure that we're in RGB. Otherwise, particularly with the universal laser, it will get confused. And we'll get more onto exactly what this means once we get into Illustrator, but basically I want to have this slide up here so when you can come back and look at this stuff later in Facebook, you can pull up this slide and be like, oh, this is RGB black, this is RGB red, and so on. I do it in the color picker. All right, so there's 4 different ways that we can make marks with a laser cutter. We can do a vector cut, we can do a vector etch, and we can do a vector score. So a vector score is going to use a tool path that we set up in Illustrator to run the laser in a nice clean line. It just continuously draws like if it was a pen. So these will make very attractive, clean, aesthetic lines. And when you set these up in Illustrator, you'll set them up as either green or blue. Vector cut, on the other hand, we'll set up in red, and it's the same idea as a vector score, but instead of only going part of the way into the material, this will cut all the way through the material. And just like at the other one, it's all made up of vector lines. Pretty simple concept. Another one we have is raster etch. So this is where we can put in raster images, so like a photograph or anything like that. And we can use the laser cutter to make marks or a halftone or a dither or whatever else onto, not dither, but you know what I mean, onto our material to create the illusion of tone, basically by tiny little dots or little lines and so on. And it will reproduce a photograph to a certain extent. Now the resolution is kind of material and laser and image dependent. So this is something that you'd want to play around with before, going all the way in. So like if I were you, I would, come in and test your material to see what an image can look like on it before doing a lot of planning around it. But basically anywhere that's black will have a lot of dots applied, and anywhere that's white will have no dots applied. And usually, depending on your material, you'll invert the image. Like if I was doing this on black acrylic, I'll invert the image because the reflective part becomes the white, so I don't want any marks on it. Or no, I've got that backwards. The cut part looks white on the black acrylic, so it's material dependent. Anyway, when we do these, we're going to rasterize them, all of our stuff together at once. So like if we're going to do a graphic on there, and if we've got multiple graphics on there, we'll rasterize it into a single graphic. And more on that once we get into Illustrator. But the key number to remember is this 300 ppi. The last thing we can do is called a raster engrave, and you can see like a really sick example over here. And the idea is that instead of using white through black to create a density of dots to create the illusion of continuous tone, it instead uses white through black to control how powerful the laser is. So obviously the more powerful it is, the deeper it will cut into the material. So you can create a low relief or bas relief image or texture or whatever onto your material quite easily. It's very time consuming, but it can yield pretty good results. And just like with the other one, the dark areas will engrave deeper, the light areas won't engrave as deeply. It has to be in grayscale, and you'll still rasterize it and set it at 300 ppi. So like when you look at these in a file, so like I usually do this on black acrylic, your file will end up looking like this. I have my vector score over here, my vector cut, my raster etch, notice that it's inverted, and my raster engrave, notice that it's not inverted. By the way, as I'm going through, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them into the question and answer feature, or there's also a chat feature in Zoom that I can answer questions in, and I'll either answer them at the end or as we go, depending on where we're at in the lecture. And I will try to leave time at the end to answer more complicated questions and demo anything that you guys want to see. So here's some example projects. So like these would be like coasters where you're just using very simple geometric shapes in Illustrator to cut it out. Same thing up here. We'll talk about how we can convert text into a shape that we can cut out. While over here, we've got a raster etch where it's just marked on here that halftone image. And then it looks like he's come back through and used a vector score to clean up the edges of the text, which is very common to do. Some other examples, people really like to make boxes with these. It's really easy and fun. In fact, there's even websites like EN MakerCase that will set up the box file for you, because honestly, that's kind of tedious. And then you can decorate the sides however you want. So this is another good way to start practicing for stuff on the laser cutter. Other projects that are really popular would be puzzles. So this is where you can make an image and you can feed this into online programs and it can spit out a puzzle format for you. And then if you need to, you can open it up and edit it in Illustrator. Another good one is you can do 3D objects actually using the laser cutter. And what you do is you have your 3D model and you upload it into a program. So like this would be like Slicer for Fusion 360, and it will make a bunch of SVG or PDF files that you can then open into Illustrator if you need to do more work on, and then cut out and stack to create your 3D object. Pretty cool. And you can see that there's two versions of it, where it's like a true stack and then like almost like a puzzle version of it for that rhino. High-end art that you see out of this, like this would be like Gabrielle right here, and you can see where she's done multiple layers of woodcuts to make quite distinct designs. And this is all stuff that's very achievable to do in Illustrator. So like you can do something like this in Illustrator if you have the gumption, time, and then also artistic talent for the layout. But like you can do this. This is doable. Locally, we also have an artist named Have. He also teaches here in Omaha, and he had a show recently over at the Union for Contemporary Art. And he actually even gave a lecture here at DoSpace maybe a year and a half ago on the kind of art that he does. So if you're looking for local references, if you're another artist, take a look at this guy. His stuff is pretty solid. And this is some of his older work. His newer work, he started adding color and painting to, which is also very interesting. Personally, I also use these quite a bit. So I like to make bas reliefs with these. And then I like to do that 3D thing where I can make a 3D model and stack it, all these pieces once I've run it through the laser cutter, and then come back through and add these other laser scored parts and then laser engraved parts to make a finished piece. So you can do quite a bit with this. And most of the designs, like all the lines on here, not the 3D object, obviously, but everything else on here is just done in Illustrator. And it's not difficult or hard. Another view of it. So let's go ahead and hop into Illustrator and see what that looks like. Let me go to share screen. I'm not on my usual spot, so excuse me if I'm a little clumsy on moving between things in this. All right, so let's come over here and take a look at our demo sheet. So this kind of stuff, again, is very simple. So like we're just gonna do, like if I wanted to make a vector score, I would set up all of my lines in green, vector cut in red, and then I have my raster stuff over here. So formatting wise, what do I need to do to make this stuff work besides the lines? And you know what, let's go ahead and thicken these lines up just to make them a little bit easier to see. Now, something very irritating is happening when I'm first sitting down right here is I'm very used to having extra controls up here. So this is where Illustrator kind of bites us in the butt. Also like Apple, where they're trying to make their stuff more easy to use and more accessible to people. They've dumbed it down in a couple ways and it's not good. So up here where it says Essentials, I'm actually going to pick Essentials Classic, and this layout will become something quite a bit more similar to what you see in other people's video lectures or tutorials on this kind of stuff, just because it makes the program useful. So these guys are quite thin. So let's thicken these up just so we can see what we're doing. So to do something like this vector score, it's really pretty straightforward. We have a bunch of different ways to make these lines. So let's take a look at some of them. So for vector score, all I did was I picked this shape tool, and then I just drew the shape that I wanted, and I will pick a color up here that I want to match for my color. So why don't we actually just make that from scratch? Let's go from scratch. I'm going to come up to File, New, and I have my new document window, and we'll label this Demo. And our material is 12 by 16 if we're going to the VLS, or 11 by 19.5 if we're going into the Glowforge. So this is all good. Now down here in advanced options, there is stuff that I care about. So I'm going to click on advanced options. I'm going to make sure that I'm in RGB color. And then where it says screen right here, I'm going to go ahead and switch to 300. Now the 300 versus 72, this only matters if you're going to include raster images. So then I will go ahead and click create. And I have my space right here ready to go. So if I wanted to make that vector cut, I can just pick this box tool right here, and I can draw my box, and just like that, I have something that has created a tool path. So if we take a closer look at this box, we can see that it is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4 points. Each one of these points is what we call an anchor. Between those points is a line, and how the laser cutter will work is it will look at this and be like, oh, this line is a tool path, and it will follow it to do its cut. So to interact with this box, I have a couple of options. I have my regular select tool, which allows me to select objects, and I have my direct select tool, which allows me to select parts of an object, so like that corner, versus the regular select tool, which allows me to move or change the size of the whole box. Now, every time I make something in Illustrator, I'm going to get a new layer in my layers panel. And this is going to be an important way to control the cutter. So if I click these 2 arrows right here, I get my layers panel. You know what, why don't I just bring that out, and let's collapse this back down. And then there's an arrow right here. This will open up my layers, and we can see that each one of these boxes has now become its own thing. Now, notice how these boxes are covering up each other's lines. The laser cutter doesn't care. Now, it looks like that I would get something that looks just like this. If I ran this through the laser cutter right now, these corners would still be present if I ran it on a vector score or vector cut. So to make this a little bit easier for me to understand, I want to turn off my fill. So up here in my top left, I have a box that's for my fill, a box for my stroke. I have it also down here. And then if I have my colors panel, I also have it over here as well. So there's a lot of places you can access this. So I'm going to select all these boxes, and I'm going to be like, you know what, I don't want any fill on it. So now I can actually see what this is going to make. Now, if I wanted to have those lines missing, I would need to join these shapes, which is actually quite easy. So if this first tool, my selection tool, if I mouse over and grab all of these, over here in properties, I get the option to join them all together. And just like that, I have a path that would go all the way around the outside of this. Now, to make this speak laser cutter, I want to color code it. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And for the Glowforge, this is less important, but for the VLS, this is much more important. I need to pick red. Now notice I have an RGB red right here. I have a not RGB red. I have another one that is an RGB. And I've got whatever red this is. Like when I click on it, this is RGB red. And that's good, because again, if I put in CMYK, it's going to confuse the cutter. And I can check to make sure I've got the right red numerically when I have my object selected by double clicking down here on my color picker. So I'm going to double click on this stroke, and I'll get my color picker window. In my color picker window, the things I care about is RGB right here, because that tells me those values. So if I wanted this to be cut, I would put red at 255. If I wanted this to be score, I would put it either in green and blue, and I would set this to 255, and I would set this to 0. Pretty simple, not rocket science. But this is where you do it, and it needs to be 255 depending on what you're doing. So if I want to cut, again, 255 red. If I want to score green or blue, let's just use blue today for the VLS, because that's how it's set up by default. We can do 255. So not hard, right? So if we come back here to this demo sheet, we can see that this is quite easy to do. But how do we actually make this text? Because if we look at my text over here, it's not text anymore. So if I run through just regular text through this, it'll assume a bunch of things that might not necessarily be correct. So if I draw a text box on here and I say I want this to be score, and you know what, let's make that bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and select score, and let's just 72 right there. So here it is, score, right? Now I need to convert this into something that speaks laser cutter. So right now this would just be a series of dots. So if I wanted filled in text, this could work. I would want to rasterize it first, but this would work. If I want an outline like I have here in my demo sheet, I need to create an outline. So under type, I'll come down to, where is it? Create outlines. And then I will turn off my fill and I will turn on my stroke. So let's say RGB blue, and there we go. Not super hard. Now to keep everything nice and organized, and you'll see that I'm doing this in my demo sheet, is I've got things separated by layers. So I'm going to make a new layer for each type of thing that I'm going to do. So down in my layers panel, I have a new layer button. And if you have the newest version of Illustrator, this will be a box with a plus sign in it, by the way. And I'll go ahead and label this score. And I'll go ahead and label this one cut. And I will keep my stuff grouped together by layers to make my life easy. Now notice somewhat confusingly that this layer color is blue and this layer color is red. So I can actually change that to make this make even more sense. If I double click on this, it gives me my layer options and I can be like, why don't I make you blue to match the color of the stuff I'm using it? And why don't I make you red to match the color of the stuff in it? And it just makes life way easier to keep track of. Not too hard, right? Now, when we're looking at these raster images, we have a little bit more work to do. So like when we open up these layers, we can see that I have a photograph in here that I've placed in. So like to bring in a photograph, you would just come up to File, Place, and you'll select the image that you want to put in. You draw and drop it in. It's not super hard. If I want to invert an image, I will select that image and I can come up to, I always forget where it is. Is it Edit? Object, it's in here somewhere. It's been so long since I had to invert something. It's either an object or edit. Edit colors, invert colors right there, and you can invert your image. Not super hard. Now, right now, to make this work correctly and go honestly faster, I need to rasterize everything. So like right now, my text is editable, see? I want it to be a raster. So to make my text a raster, I'm going to convert it. And for cleaner, better text, you're actually going to convert your text separately, and then you'll come back and you'll merge the two as a single raster afterwards. So I've got my text selected, so I can either grab my select tool and click on my text, or right here, I can click on the button next to it to also select it. I wonder why it keeps, there we go. And text, there we go. So I've got my raster etch selected. You can see that it's here. I just clicked on it and I'll come up to type. Actually, we'll go to object and we'll go to rasterize. So this will turn it into a set of pixels. Now, the reason why we're doing our text and image differently is that a lot of fonts have something called hinting in them. And hinting deals with where the font lines up weirdly on a line of pixels based on its shape and size. So if we have hinting on, that's where the designer for the font has spent extra time to make the font appear better on a digital screen. And we can take advantage of that when we're laser cutting by using that hinting. So right here where it says anti-aliasing, I'm going to pick type optimize hinted. I'm going to make sure that I'm in RGB, and I'm going to make sure that I'm at 300 PPI, and then I'm going to set my background to transparent. I'm not sure if this matters on the ULS, but I had students who selected white when they were using the Glowforge, and it would create random dots on there sometimes. So I would just go ahead and pick transparent. Then you just click OK, and it turns it into a raster font. I mean, it turned out raster font, that's something different. It rasterizes it. Then I'm going to select both of these and rasterize them together one more time to turn them into a single object. And I can go to rasterize, and I can go to part optimize and click OK. And just like that, it is ready to go. So we can see that it's a single image right here. Then I'm going to do the same thing to this one. So I'll go ahead and click on my text. I will come up to object. I'll go to rasterize. I'll be like, yo, give me that type optimization, please. 300 transparent RGB. Cool. OK. And then I'll select everything. Notice how like there's actually some other stuff hidden in there. Like there's a earlier version of this. So I can go ahead and get rid of all that just by rasterizing this whole layer. So object, rasterize. Transparent art, okay, poof, it's now down to just this. Not super hard, right? So let's look at putting this out into the ULS. Let's check my notes, make sure I haven't skipped anything. Talk about the machines, demo, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we'll get to more setup in a minute. All right, so let's take a look at how to get these out of this program. So I can come to File, and I'm going to go to Print, and I'll get this print medium, and this is just for the ULS, and I'll click Setup, and I'll come to Preferences, and here's where I'm going to have the controls for whatever I'm cutting. So like I can come over to Material Databases. Oh, actually, I probably have the wrong, you probably can't see what I'm talking about. Give me a second to change my share. We'll just do the screen. Sorry if you see everything. There we go. So here's what I'm talking about. Let me do that one more time. Cancel, cancel. So I went to File, I went to Print, and I went to Setup, and I went to Preferences. So I want to set how this is going to behave now in here. So I can go to Material Databases, and you can pick whatever you're going to use. Like I really like to use acrylic. And I will click Manual Control after I've got my initial setup. And I've got a bunch of things that I can set. So like I can set my quality on my raster images to be quite high. I can then change how it's going to create its appearance. I wouldn't use black and white. I'd use error diffusion or halftone. And you know, you can also change your density and so on to like increase or decrease the appearance of it. And then up here, you can see that my PPI is set to 500. So I've got plenty of resolution in here to work. And then like I can change my power. Like if I run this through the material and it doesn't look good, like it doesn't look dense enough, I can turn the power up or I can turn the power down if it melts everything too much. And so this is where like playing a little bit and running tests is going to be important. Vector, I have the same idea where I have controls for either quality or how deeply it's going to cut. So if I wanted to cut more deeply versus not cut as deeply. Similarly, I can control that. So like, let's go ahead and grab blue. So like I could make this blue my vector cut. And so like I can turn my power up for my vector cut to make it go, not my vector cut, my vector score to make it cut into the material more deeply. And I can also make it go more slowly to make it appear better. But like there's a limitation to it. Like there's a limitation to balancing these two. Similarly, I can come into engraving field, and this is where like I can use that rotary guide. Now, if I want to do that 3D effect where I'm going to engrave into it, I'd come to raster, and instead of where it says normal, I would pick 3D. And for the universal laser system, if I wanted to have both on there, like my Illustrator file has right now, I would need to turn on and off the different layers and run it through twice. Like I would need to run through for cancel, done. I would need to run through for the raster etch, and then I would need to run a separate one through the raster engrave because it can't do both at the same time. Like I haven't been able to get it to do it that way, which isn't that bad. Like as long as you don't move your material, it will be just fine. So like for the 3D engrave, and you click on setup, you can see how you can modulate the power. And this is where running a test again for your material can be good. And you can find out how many steps you actually have that create different layers of appearance. And then once you have this set up, you'll just click OK, and it'll load up into the cutter and you'll run it like normal. I would get like a mentor, or I would refer to the handy dandy manual that's here in DoSpace for the cutter before actually using it. It's like this part isn't that bad. So cancel, done. Now to put this onto the Glowforge, we have to do something a little bit different. So to put this into the Glowforge, we will come to File, and we'll go to Save As, and we're going to save this as an SVG file. I'm going to go ahead and put this on the desktop, and I'll click Save. Now right here is something really important. Image location, embedded, has to be embedded. If you have raster images in here and you picked link, it will break everything. You have to have embedded. If you have raster images, they must be embedded. And then you click OK. So then you open up, and they'll give you a login to get an access to this part of Glowforge. You'll click create, you'll click upload from file, you'll go to wherever you have the file and you'll click open. And it takes it a hot minute. So this is one of the disadvantages of Glowforge, is that it's a web-based app. So it's a wee bit slow, not fast, just a wee bit slow. And you can see how it's already got everything set up and ready to go. I would pick my material. So like medium acrylic is 1/8 inch, thick acrylic is 1/4 inch acrylic. So I could be like, thick acrylic, please. And it's going to make guesses on what I want it to do. So like it's got my engrave already for these. Let's say I wanted to do a 3D engrave. I could click on it and I would click 3D engrave. For this one, my raster etch, I can click on it. And it's got draft photo, so I could do HD photo if I wanted it to come out even better. Just know that this would make it take a long time. So draft goes really quick, HD takes a long time. And then it defaulted my vector score to cut, which I can see that by it being red. So I can click on it and instead switch to score and I'm done. I can also be like, make it look better. Again, that takes longer. And it took my score out and made it a separate thing. Why would it not group it together? So if we go back to Illustrator, you'll be able to see that I actually set this file up wrong on purpose. So if we look at these lines, so like here's my lines, right? And I double click on it, we can see one, these aren't actually green. So that's part of the problem with this, is that it's not RGB green. So this one is 57, 180, 174. And if I then click on my score and double click on my stroke to see it, we can see that this is actually an entirely different green. So if I wanted this to behave correctly, I would need to go 0, 255, and 0, and that would now be correct. But I want all of these to be correct, so why don't we go ahead and change all of them to that, 255, and click OK. And now it is the correct color of green. I would just go ahead and go to save again, because we're in SVG now. See, it has the little SVG right there, so it's telling me that it's in that. And let's go ahead and re-upload this to the magic that is Chrome. So let's go ahead and delete all of you guys. Bye-bye. And we'll click the plus sign. We'll click upload. We'll go to demo sheet. We'll click open. And it should now be grouped together, just like magic. Once it's done processing. Again, like this is the problem with this, guys. It takes forever to process. And we can see now that it has it grouped together. Still thinks it's cut for whatever reason, so we can just click score. High quality. Once you get more comfortable with these things, you can click these arrows over, and then you get a lot more control over this sort of stuff. And this is where like these machines are used often enough that you can Google different ways that these things get used, and you can see, my brain turns back on, you can see the different ways that people do stuff. Like a lot of the research has been done for you. Very cool. So let's look at some more tricks for setting stuff up in Illustrator. So like this is all pretty straightforward. We just drew some lines with the shape tool. We typed and we outlined it. This is the same idea. We threw an image in here and then we turned stuff into rasters. So what if we wanted to do something more like this? So here is a woman's face from a nice photograph that I did that I traced over. Now, when I traced over this, I didn't use the shape tool, obviously. If I was masochistic, I could, in theory, do it with the pen tool. So the pen tool allows me to click and drop points on the surface to make custom shapes. So let's go ahead and select that shape. Whoops. I have the wrong tool selected. There we go. And let's empty out its fill just to make our lives easier. And so now it's like I have a distorted rectangle, right? I can modify this a little bit further by clicking and holding on the pen tool and getting to the anchor point tool. And that allows me to bend these lines or, click and drag on a corner to start shifting it out. Notice as I'm dragging on it, I get these handles. We call these the Bezier curve handles. And they allow me to more finely control the curve. So in theory, I could make this drawing using this, but that would be an exercise of not fun. Now, Illustrator does have a brush tool in it. And so I'm not going to be able to fully demo the brush tool, but like if I had a tablet right here, a drawing tablet, I can click up here and I can be like, yo, give me the calligraphic brush tool. And what that means is when I click and draw with this, it would feel the pressure of my brush and modulate how wide of an area it's leaving. You can kind of see that in here where there's some thickness variance in the brush stroke of the drawing right here. And that's how I did it, is I used that sensitive brush. That said, I can still draw with this with the mouse fairly easily. And why don't we make this bigger just so it's easier to see. So like we've got our, let's say I wanted to just draw that in there. And you can see that it even smooths it out, which is really nice. Now, unfortunately, right now, all this would do is it would look at the inside of this line and be like, there, that red line right there would be my tool path. But what if I wanted to have the outside of this black line be my tool path? Really easy. I select this outline and I can come up to Object, Path, and Outline Stroke. And now notice that the red line goes around the outside of it, and that means it's moved my tool path for the laser cutter to the outside of this. Now an error happened when I drew this. So let's zoom in. I'm gonna hit Control plus to zoom in. You can also hit Control minus to zoom out. And we can see that there's a little blub, blub, blub in there. So I need to fix that. So rather than grabbing the direct select tool and clicking and deleting these points, which will mess this up a little bit, I could probably grab this shape builder tool and I can just click and drag over this. Oh, is it gonna let me do it? Yeah, it's not a shape. So we'll have to use the delete anchor point tool. And we can go in there and start removing all that random guck in there to make this path work correctly. And we can see like, yeah, there's a bunch of guck in there. Why didn't the shape builder tool work on that? It should have. Yeah, there it goes. I just wasn't zoomed in enough. So I'm just clicking and dragging with the shape builder tool over those, and it's adding them to that one shape. So now it's fixed and ready to go. So I could then just change the fill to nothing, and I can change my outline to whatever I want it to be. So, oh, see how I switched to CMYK red? It's because this file is in CMYK. It's Trixie. So I can switch it to be in RGB by going to color settings and edit. Oops, not color settings. I want to go to document color mode and pick RGB. So then I can delete this or do whatever I want with it. So I can be like, well, so now I've just got this CMYK. What am I going to do? I got to double click on this and be like, yo, please make this 255 for me, except I have the fill. There we go. Please make this 255 red for me and U0, U0. Now it speaks laser cutter. Although I'd want to turn off the fill as well. There we go. Now for this guy, this girl right here, when I drew this image, the way I drew it is that when you cut it, none of it will fall apart. So it's a single piece of paper that you can then mount to another sheet without any of it falling out. So that's why we have like this hair coming down right here for the eye. So this is something that I want to check for when I'm prepping these files. Something else I want to check for is all of this random junk. What is all of this? You can see as I turn it on and off, it doesn't do anything, but these are all, oh, I see, it's this right here, see it? These would all show up in my laser cut. So I need to make sure I don't have random junk. And that's why you need to look at your stuff. I had these guides in here just to help me draw this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete out my guides by hitting the trash can. And let's take a look at this cutout. So if we add a fill to it, you can see that everywhere that's black touches. And so everywhere that's white gets cut out. So if you're interested in doing something like this, if you have your fill on, it makes it really easy to see what's joined up and what isn't. And then you can use that shape builder tool to put these pieces together to make something like this. It's pretty rad. Again, though, when you run it through, you'd want to turn off the fill. Oops, I have to have it selected. Turn off the fill, and it runs through just fine now. There we go. And just save it as an SVG or hit the print button and it goes. Let's look at another example. So here is an example for 3D engraving. So I have my exterior cut because I cut this out of a larger sheet because I wanted clean laser cut edges. That's what this layer is. And like we can just, select it and it's like, yep, there it is. And then I have an interior cut because when we look at this object, I've got it right here. Let me turn off share so we can see it. So it looks like this guy, but it's 2 layers thick. So I cut out this top layer and then I engraved this bottom layer. So I then put the 2 over each other and glued them together. Share screen, Illustrator, share. So to set it up, I have that exterior cut for both sheets, so it's easy to line up. And then I have that interior cut for one of them. So like this would be one sheet, and then this would be one sheet. Now to set all of this up, I made individual circles. So let's zoom in and look at these circles, and they're all layered so that there are only certain ones of them are visible. So like they're just circle on top of circle on top of circle. And when we click on it, we can see that they go through different types of gray. So let's go ahead and do show options. And if you watch the brightness value, you'll see that it takes, of course, it switches back to thanks Illustrator. You can see that it drops down in values. So if I want to make a 3D effect like this, all I have to do is set different types of black as I go. Now for this, it's the same idea. Darker areas get engraved further, and white areas get engraved less. This one's a proprietary secret to get a photograph in there like this, but usually what you have to do is load it up into Photoshop, and you'll build out you'll draw over the photograph in blobs of gray to get it to appear 3D, and then you can do this little blend effect in the program. You can also do it to a certain extent here in Illustrator, where you can use the gradient tool and merge edges together. So it's not super hard, but like running this through the machine takes a very, very long time. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes left. Do you guys have anything that you want to see demoed, or should I go over more toolpath options in the program? If we don't have any questions, I'll look at more ways of joining and building these shapes. But if you want to see something particular demoed, this is your chance to ask. So you can put it again in chat, or there's also a question and answer feature in Zoom. So if you want to see something demoed, this is your chance. Otherwise, more ways of drawing fancy lines in Illustrator. And while we're waiting a second, I'm going to check my notes to make sure I haven't missed anything. Talked about setting up rasters, turning text into toolpaths, brush strokes into toolpaths, and different kinds of projects. So like if we want to see some more example projects while anyone is typing. So here is another good trick. How do you change the size of the document, something that is 5x7 versus the whole size of the printer? So luckily, if your object is only this big, you can just throw it onto the printer, and then however big you make it in Illustrator, you can just overlay it and you kind of see where it's going to be in the printer. So in the case of the VLS, you'll use a laser to line everything up. And for the Glowforge, it's WYSIWYG. They've got a camera and you just overlay your thing on an image that it sets up. If I want to set up my document to be the size of what I'm cutting, which is kind of frustrating to do because you have to get everything lined up perfectly, during document creation, you can change the size. So let me go back into Illustrator and I'll show you what I mean. So like when we go to File, New, and we create a new document, we can be like, I want my thing to actually only be 5x7. I click Create, and I have a smaller space. And I can even see how big this is by hitting Control or Command R, and I get these rulers on here, and it will show me its size. I can right-click on the ruler to switch it to inches or whatever file size you want. Now let's say I just changed my mind later and I wanted to make this bigger. I'm gonna hit Control- to zoom out. I can click this artboard tool down here, and I can make my workspace bigger. So I could be like, why don't we actually make this 11x14 to fit that standard frame size? And I can just change the size of my artboard. And that would leave my artwork alone on my artboard. So like if I had So like if I was working with this laser cut head, and let's say that my material was smaller than this. So let's say my material was only 9 by 6 or whatever. We could see, oh, I had the 9, there we go. We can see that it's quite a bit smaller. And why don't we go ahead and click this button to rotate it. I'm going to come back up here to my selection tool, and I'm going to select all of my art. And then while holding down the shift key, I'm going to click and drag on one of these corners, and I'm going to shrink it down and line it back up into here like so. Come on, snap in there. And then hold down the shift key and expand it back out to fill that space. So it's really, really, really easy to change the size of stuff that are vectors. Changing the size of these rasters can sometimes cause issues though. Let me open chat back up. Yep, there we go. So like some other examples that can be really nice to keep in mind when you're setting up your files is, so like I've got a little service reward. One of my coworkers is retiring, and so they asked me to make a little plaque for her, and I'm planning on painting it. And so if I leave the paper on here when I cut, one, it's way easier to clean because I don't have all that fume and guck on there that I have to clean off. But I also have this paper, which is like magic masking. So I can just spray paint this, and anywhere that I've cut in will be painted, and then I can peel the paper off, and that will be still nice and clear plexiglass. So it's a nice little trick to pre-mask your stuff. Now, if you have something that already has the material peeled off of it, if you apply blue painter's tape over the material, that has the same effect as this brown paper, where you can make a mask right off the bat that way, and then your uncut surface or unmarred surface will stay very clean. Another interesting example of what you can do with it is, so like here is a text panel that I made of a font that I designed based off of a 14th century fantasy font. But if you paint the backside of it black, you can get this nice little float effect over it, or any color behind it. So just more fun stuff that you can do with the laser cutter that's set up. And I actually didn't even load this into Illustrator. I made this in InDesign, and I exported it as a PDF, which kept the font as a font, not as a raster. So it outlined my forms on there for me automatically, which is spiffy. Because if you actually break apart a font, it's all just those vector and Bezier curves, which is pretty neat. Let's go back to Illustrator, and we'll go to about 2:30, looking at other techniques for merging stuff together, unless we have more questions up here. And Illustrator, share. All right, so let's look at more ways of building shapes. So building shapes in Illustrator can be surprisingly frustrating at times. Let's close you. Because like when we click and hold on the shape tool, we have only so many shapes. So like here's my ellipse, and let's go ahead and draw a circle, and oh no, it's floppy. So let's say that I didn't want it to be distorted. If I hold down the shift key, it locks it as a perfect circle. Same thing if I use the other tools, it will lock it as a equal version of it. It's like a square versus a rectangle. And then let's say I wanted to draw it from the center. If I hold down the Alt key, it will draw from the center of where I'm making my mark. Now, if I wanted this to be a hemisphere, what do I do? So if I want this to be a hemisphere, I need to cut it in half somehow. So like in theory, I could come over here with the direct select tool and like delete and edit points, but like that's going to be an exercise of just frustration, madness, and sadness. So there's a lot of really quick, easy ways to break these things apart. So I have the line tool, which I've mostly ignored. And I can just click on this anchor point with the line tool to snap it to that anchor. I'm going to click and drag down, and I'm going to attach it to that other anchor point. And now I have a line going across it. So I have a full circle and a line over it. So you can see that over here in my layers. Now, if I select both of these, which I can do by clicking and dragging over it like this with the select tool, or honestly, if I click to the right of it and then hold down the shift key and click to the right of the other one, I've got them both selected. I now have my circle that's bisected. But if I click these Pathfinder tools, none of these are going to give me half a circle. So this is where I'd come back to that shape builder tool. So if I click on the shape builder tool, and I hold down the Alt key, notice how next to my mouse, a little minus thing appears. That means delete. So I'm just going to drag over this and it deletes it. Now, something that can be irritating when you're on the laser cutter is that it will sometimes still leave parts of things you don't want. So like that original line is still there. So I need to make sure I go back and remove that line, because even though it looks like it isn't there, it would end up marking or cutting that spot twice because it's on there twice. So delete, and I've got my hemisphere. Now, something that can happen when you're not used to using these tools is you can sometimes accidentally place something ever so slightly off. And so this time we can see it. We can see that that isn't quite lined up perfectly. And so if it's not lined up perfectly, I don't get that hemisphere half effect. So if you're not super comfortable with these tools, another way that you can draw that line to make your life easier is if you click above the circle and then click and drag down below the circle, these lines overlap, which would then make that shape builder tool technique work just fine. And then I could also come back through and be like, go away and go away. And I'd have to still select that one line and be like, bye. Super cool, right? Now let's say I wanted to punch a star out of this. I could then come over here, I can come to my star tool and draw my handy dandy star. And so right now, this would actually cut just fine. I don't have to do any shape building, because if you think about how it would cut a star out of this half circle. So like sometimes you don't have to do anything fancy, but like if I was doing this as a real design, you know, for like a image or whatever, this would appear black and I wanted to like show something behind it, then I would need to join these together. And I'd be like, why don't we do exclusion? So I hit the exclude button right here and it minuses whatever is above through it. So now like if I had, you know, like a, oops, here it's just select off to the side and we had another shape on there or whatever. We could see through. We could see through it. Now the laser cutter doesn't care about that, but like when you're drawing, that's what can be confusing. So like I didn't necessarily need to punch that hole for this to work. Oop. Do we have chat? Sorry, the chat feature's being a little hard to bring up. This is being recorded. Can we access this video at a later date? Where will it be located? This video is indeed being recorded, and if you go to DoSpace's Facebook page, you can find it under the video section of their page. That's part of the reason why I had that slideshow at the beginning, is because I wanted to have just quick, easy to find images for you to refer to so you could see important settings. So you don't necessarily have to flip through it and listen to me blather for an hour to find the stuff that you need. All right, one more interesting tool in this last little bit of time that we have is the blob brush tool. So we had the paintbrush tool, right? And this is where we could draw a line, right? Let's make this easier to see. Why don't we delete you and let's pick an easier to see color and let's make you big. Womp, right? But what we found out when we clicked on it is we had that interior line, right? Excuse me. Now, one advantage of this is that I still have those Bezier curves as a line. So it makes it really easy for me to adjust. And then when I'm happy about it, I would go up to, you know, object path, outline stroke. And then I have my shape and I'd have to go through and clean up that internal stuff with the shape builder tool. And I'm like, please go away. Please become one, go away, blah, 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 blah. Now there's another way that I can just skip that step. So if I click and hold on the brush tool, I find the blob brush tool. And when I draw off the blob brush tool, instead of putting an interior line on there, so when I zoom in and I grab my direct select tool, again, that allows me to edit parts of stuff, we can see that it's got an outline of it already. I don't have to go up to object, path, and create outline. Now, the disadvantage of this tool is that if I wanted to adjust this line, now I have Bezier curve handles on either side of it, which can make it more difficult to adjust the line if I want to keep that thickness the same all the way throughout it. So it's just another way of making those shapes. Like if you don't need that control, you can skip that step by picking the blob brush tool. All right, that about ends the demonstration. I hope this has been useful for you guys and that you make some cool stuff. Laser cutting is a lot of fun. Hope to catch you all in the future and maybe run into you guys. And if you have questions once in-person stuff shows up again, feel free to ask for mentoring.